Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, demons. I've got this feeling.
Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and it's been a long time since we lost 3 games in a row within the season. In fact, it's been 1,025 days. Back then, we all breathed a sigh of relief that the horror 2019 season was finally over. And now, as we head into the bye, having been toppled from top spot, one wonders what the rest of season 2022 will hold for the Demons. Joining me to find out is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, Bidman. Good evening, Demonlanders. Well, as I say, a week's a long time in football, but with all the announcements in the press over the last couple of weeks, a couple of days is more than enough for the Melbourne Footy Club.
Well, 3 weeks is an eternity in football, and we've been living through it. Also joining us tonight, no doubt tell us that he told us so, and it's all the loading's fault. Binman, good evening, Binman.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. It's the I'm up and about a bit. I'm hoping that the D's continue to drift. They're out to 360 for the flag. A bit of bad news about Maxi will cause them to drift a little bit further, and I might wait a month and see if I can get 4s, and I'll jump on them like I did last year and pay for the end of the season trip to Japan, which is actually, that's not true. I didn't have an end of season trip to Japan, but that's where D's fans go skiing, not up at Bulla.
Oh, well, yes, I would have thought Aspen or Vale is more up the Demons' alley.
All 3 for me, thanks.
Yeah, no, I don't mind Aspen. There's just too many Americans there. So
Fair enough. Well, let's get straight into the wrap-up. No doubt we'll talk about Max and how we're going to cope with life after Max, particularly in this season, a little bit later on in the show. But we'll just give a bit of a wrap-up of this game. And I guess the question we need to answer tonight, and no doubt both my co-hosts will have their say, is whether it's the loading, and that's the increase in training loads for a period of time to ensure peak performance at a later time in the season, or is it the loss of the playing personnel both before and within the game, that upsets the structures a lot. And more likely it's a combination of both factors. And whichever it is, the fact remains that the D's did look a bit stagnant, and we once again coughed up a lead and were overrun in the end by a team that really looked hungrier and were prepared to take risks and take the game on, and then, ended up making us look very silly. I saw a graphic on Twitter from the broadcast lauding our first quarter performances this season and praising the way that we strangle teams. And they displayed our opponents' first quarter scores from a selection of matches this season. I'll just run through a few of them. The Bombers, 0 goals 4. Port, 0 goals 3. Giants, 0-5. Saints, 0-3. Freo, 1 goal 6. Swans, 1 goal 5. Magpies, 0 goals 5. And you might say that's my MFC, is on full display here, but I don't think that those scores are a reflection of us really strangling teams. These stats highlight the inaccuracy of our opposition and probably mask a bigger problem that may have been there all along this year. And sure, we got out to leads in those games as a result of our opponent's inaccuracy. And in the early part of the season, against some inferior opposition, it was enough. But as we've seen in the past few weeks, that once the opposition starts to kick straight and our run stops, and ultimately we get overrun, and had our opponents been more accurate early on, then perhaps and particularly early in the year, perhaps our perfect 10-0 start to the season might have turned out differently. Last week, I rolled out some stats of our last halves for the past 2 matches that highlighted, the last half fade-outs. And last week, we were 70 points in the red. And this week, the stats have not improved one little bit. We've scored 6 goals, 16, 52 in the past 3 weeks. And our opposition have scored a massive 25 goals, 9, 159. That's a 106-point differential in our last 3 matches after half-time, and that's a massive red flag. There's no doubt the loss of Stephen May over the past few weeks is most definitely a contributing factor. He's the general of our back line, and whilst Jake Lever can marshal the troops and be an effective leader of the backmen, he simply cannot cover the defensive one-on-one capabilities of May. And he's also, with Mount Maisie in the team, you don't have what Jake Lever's best at, and that's sort of being that third man up interceptor. And add to that we had 2 periods of 20-plus minutes where we had defenders, first Petty and then debutant Disco Turner, off the field undergoing concussion protocols. And, that certainly doesn't help our defensive abilities or our structures. Similarly, down forward, the loss of Tom McDonald over the past few weeks has been a mitigated disaster, one that isn't going to be solved simply by T-Mac returning in the short term, because that's not going to happen. We may see him later in the year, if at all. And I saw a stat on Twitter that said this season we average 96 points when T-Mac plays, as opposed to 62 points when he doesn't. And that's a differential of 34 points less without him, or 6 goals without T-Mac. And, those 6 goals just about win us matches in the last 3 weeks. Not that he would have kicked 6 goals in those games, but that stat is certainly one that's worrying. Also, some stats with and without T-Mac. With him in the team, kicks inside 50 are marked 20% of the time, as opposed to 12% without him. And with him in the team, 24% of those inside 50s result in goals, whereas without him, only 15% of inside 50s result in goals. And those are very telling numbers. And it seems that neither Weed nor Mitch Brown are the answers here. Our forward line is simply dysfunctional at the moment, and one contested mark between Ben and Mitch Brown and Bailey Fritsch is just devastating and highlights the impotency of our forward line at the moment. Our midfield racked up some impressive numbers. Oliver, 43 possessions, Viney, 33, Petrarca, 32. But without a lot of support and a lack of two-way running from a lot of their teammates, and, well, the bye just cannot come quick enough. Boys, my MFC SS has come back with a vengeance, and the outlook is not pretty at all. We have a daunting back half to the fixture, starting with the top-of-the-table clash against the Lions. As we know now, we'll be without our premiership captain and 5-time All-Australian ruckman in Max Gawn. We're staring down the barrel of possibly a 4th consecutive loss, and on our home turf to boot. I'll start with you, B-Man. Any other general comments you want to hit before we hit tactical talk?
I think a really big factor that has to be considered is again, we've talked about a lot, is injuries and the impact. So we'll touch on loading a bit later and all of that. The reality is that injuries is by far the biggest determinant of success in football. Now, leaving aside our obvious fatigue, I mean, the numbers, what were the numbers for the second half that you just said, Andy, in the last 3 games?
It was like 6 goals, 16 to it was a 100 and something differential. 6 goals to 25.
Again, as I said last week, you apply Occam's razor to that, and the logical answer to why that number is that, given a body of work over 2 seasons, is fatigue. Now, don't even worry about the conversation about what the cause of that fatigue is all of the fumbles, all of the things, but most dramatically of all, our fall away in the last 20 minutes of each of those 3 games is a complete outlier if you look at across the sweep of the 23 games or 25 games last season and the 10 this year. So just looking at that number, that they're complete outliers. The first quarter is interesting because we have been playing well in the first quarter of the last 3 matches. We took a lead into each of the games, I think, bar the Freo game at the end of the first quarter, I should say.
I agree, and I'll let you continue. But when you have a look at it, our opposition was very inaccurate in a lot of those games, particularly the last 3 weeks and earlier on in the season. So we did get out to leads, but it maybe masks something else.
No, that's a totally reasonable point. More my point is that regardless of the opposition's inaccuracy, our best quarter for the last 3 weeks has been the first quarter. Or, I mean, I guess we've also played well in the third quarter at times, but we've looked visibly fresher.
Yeah.
We've played a different style of football. And, again, I point everyone towards Goody's post-match presses. They're just first class. And he talked this week, it was really revealing. He talked about method. Our method broke down. I mean, what do you think he's talking about? He's talking about our ability to maintain our system. And it's broken down because of fatigue. Again, doesn't really matter what the cause is for but what I get frustrated with is people's answer to the cause is like there's, the debate about loading's been raging on Demonland this week, but the other answers to the cause are often framed as Melbourne's mental weakness. The other opposition teams have worked us out. We're a bunch of spuds. We can't mark the ball up forward. We're getting killed aerially. I mean, they're like, the reasons for explaining our performance often default to these very difficult to quantify causes, and without any evidence. I mean, we've built up a really strong body of work at this footy club under Goodwin, and we should be, people should have some faith in where we're heading. But when you get statistic outliers like our second half, balanced by the fact that in those games we've started well, when we're not fatigued and when our system does hold up, it's got to tell you something. So, I'm as confident as I've been in terms of our game plan and where we've been. The actual game, to be honest, just back to my point about injuries, it's by far the biggest issue. And, I think if anything these fans could be accused of this year is getting ahead of themselves in terms of the fact that, we kept winning without Lever, for instance, or without Salem, or as we talked about on the podcast, our ability to restructure our back six and still be effective down back was phenomenal, has been all season. But the reality is we've had, maybe 30 to 40 of our best 20, we've probably lost 30 to 40 games of our best 22 this year. If maybe 25 to 30. And now with Gorney going down, that's going to jump up. Last year, we probably, for the full season, including the grand final, we might have only lost, somewhere between 20 and 30 of our best 22 out injured. And so there's that factor. And so we did brilliantly to win as many games as we did. But in the last 3 weeks, leading aside our collapse of our sort of ability, the method that Goody refers to, is we've had injuries in matches. We're during the matches. And I don't think people fully understand. And partly I think it's because what they see Melbourne do last year in the coming into the finals and we win 10 in a row, maybe fans do think we're superhuman. But if you take out your best defender during a match, any team's going to struggle. Did you see what happened when Wiedering came out of that Carlton side? They stopped performing, full stop. They just fell off a cliff as soon as he walked off the field. But on Sunday, it was insane. On Monday, it was insane. Within about a 5 or 6 minute period, Turner knocked himself into next week, broke his cheekbone, came immediately off the ground. Petty got smashed again and amazingly didn't immediately come off the ground for a concussion test, but subsequently did. And about 2 or 3 minutes later, Gorn came off the ground with his, what turns out now to be Sid Moses injury, was off for 10 minutes. So we lost three of our tallest players within a 5-6 minute period. What team is going to be able to recover from that? We're not a bunch of superhumans. So I actually think we've played fantastic. We've played well in the last 3 weeks to overcome some of those odds against teams that are up and about. Are clearly, my position on the fatigue and the cause of that. So, I look at it much more positively about our performance, and all credit to them. I think it's really revealing what Goody's been saying in the presses. So he has emphasised our effort every week in those losses. He has made a point of emphasising how great our effort's been. You compare that to Longmuir jumping into his players after the loss to Collingwood, where he basically said they got ahead of him. Goodwin's never said anything like that. He said our pressure numbers have been okay, our contested ball numbers have been okay. And that's the other interesting thing about the stats. Our contested ball numbers, for instance, in this match, were basically level at half time. Up to about 3/4 time was still level, and then just slowly fell away and that mirrored the other two losses as well.
George, before I get to you, we do have a caller on the line. Good evening. Who am I talking to?
Oh, hello, Andy. Michael from Paran. Hello, Andy. Hello, George. Hello, Big Man.
Hi, Michael. How are you going?
Well, thank you. Good summary. I think I'm not one of those the sky has fallen in brigade. I hear what you say. A couple of quick questions. One, I think our unsung hero in the back line has been Petty. He's played so consistently, and for some games he's been on one leg. I don't know how many more injuries he can tolerate. And I'm just thinking that are we perhaps expecting some of our players like Petty and Max to play through the pain barrier a little bit much? Can we manage them a little bit better? That's one question. The second question is, I hear a lot about training load, but I don't hear much definition about that. And I don't hear much about it in context. I think that it really needs to be defined because people might have various understandings about the impact of that. And very quickly, I thought Daniel Turner showed enough to suggest he has a future before he was injured. Is it time for Majak Daw, and is it worth trying Luke Jackson at centre-half forward? Gentlemen, over to you.
All right. George, maybe you want to talk about Petty and perhaps, and then we'll go on to B-Man. You might talk about the loads and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah, look, all of those are serious questions, and I think we've partially provided the answer in what Bin Man's opening statement was all about. Petty is a fantastic player, and quite honestly, I don't know how he stayed on the ground.
It's being held together by sticky tape at the moment.
Well, it has to be a gaffer tape of some sort because he's doing a great job. He's cemented his place in the back line. Unfortunately, our situation and the circumstances are that apart from Stephen May being out, he's being asked to take a greater load than what perhaps he would normally. And then the second thing, as Bin Man has mentioned there, we've had these in-game injuries to not just to Petty as well, but others around him. So it's impossible in-game to provide him with relief when all and sundry around are falling apart, quite literally. And you're seeing a similar sort of fall-off in Jake Lever's output. People who are going, what's he on about? He's not intercepting. It's because these in-game injuries are so seriously affecting our structures and their ability to play their normal game. It's just tragic that we lost Petty and Turner basically at the same time. And Max goes off the ground. All the Collingwood supporters get wet in their underpants about the performance of Mason Cox, but it happened at exactly the time we had our three tallest players off the ground. It was dead easy for him because he had no opposition, and that was our problem. That these in-game injuries are killing us, and the loss of these critical players killed us at the exact wrong times. But unfortunately for Petty, we can't, in his circumstances, we can't do anything about it when they're on the field. And the only other option we've really got as a tall backman is Tomlinson. He's been in and out over the previous weeks, but I don't think we're going to be dropping Petty. An 80% fit Petty is better than a lot of the other options that we've got playing at Casey.
Big Man, you want to speak to the loads? Hold on a sec, caller. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. That I understand all that, but I think there are times for a young player that you can really overstress them. It might be time to rest them and say, well, look, get fully fit. Otherwise, you do them the potentially long-term damage.
B-Man, do you want to speak to that in terms of there have been people on Demon Lands and I've seen on social media saying, we're playing players who are clearly injured. They're playing them through the pain barrier. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm just questioning that generally.
B-Man,
I'm not sure who the saying can be attributed to about the history and failing to learn from history and repeating mistakes. Is it Churchill or
Einstein?
Or and it makes it's really interesting if you go back to Demon Land. One of the great things about Demon Land is it logs everything, of course. So if you go back to round 13, and I posted on Demon Land during the week, there's a thread about our loss, of course, our post game loss to Collingwood last game. So exactly the corresponding time, in fact, down to the day of Queen's birthday game, round 13, and it basically is repeated. You could pick up that whole thread and repost it, and it would take someone 25 minutes to work out that they're reading last year's thread. And that issue about training loads comes up time and time again. And I thought the same thing last year. We talked about it. Maybe we should be resting players over the bye. Maybe we shouldn't play Gawn. He looks beat up. We shouldn't play in that Port game. And so we had that discussion on the podcast as well. And what was clear at the end of the season, it came out anyway, but there was a fantastic podcast with Bruckner called Brookie and with Burjo. And I'd really recommend Michael chasing it down and listening to it, because he addresses that very issue. And basically,
But he's no longer at the club.
No. So his philosophy...
He's no longer at the club.
No, yeah, I know he's no longer at the club, but his philosophy exactly on that issue was resilience, and that you don't rest players. You train super hard and you don't rest players. And his replacement, Owen Griffith, was under him and follows basically the same philosophy, and he was his acolyte, if you like. He was, he's fantastic, fantastically qualified, was at Brisbane. Brisbane had a brilliant run of soft tissue injuries under Selwyn Griffith's regime up there, and he came in for a year. They did a great job, so he worked underneath Burgess, and he's, by all the things I've heard, is that he's implementing pretty much the same sort of program, but even more intense, and central to that belief or that philosophy is Burgess's belief in resilience and pushing through pain and not resting players. That's a critical part of the philosophy. So that's why they do that. Of course, everyone can have that.
I can understand that, George. Yep, I can understand that, George, and agree with you. But there have got to be limits, and perhaps they're pushing to the max. Forgive the pun. I hear everything you say, and it's perfectly logical. And I'm a historian myself, so I'm familiar with going back into history and place a lot of stock on it. But my question was, there've got to be limits, and I think we're pushing the limits a bit. Be that as it may, Daniel Turner, I think he showed enough. And is it time for Magic Door? Some people are saying he's injured, or what's what? Do you think it's time that Magic came and gave them a hand, and is it worth trying Luke Jackson at centre-half forward?
We'll talk more about ins and outs later, but we may as well, guys. George, you watch a bit of Casey Magic. Where's he at? Could he fill in? We'll go into more depth a bit later, but could he be a potential fill-in in these next few weeks?
I think Magic might be called upon because simply we haven't got Max. But otherwise, Magic wouldn't be. I saw him live, 2 weeks ago, or just over 2 weeks ago. He's a long way from it. People just throw these names around without actually knowing whether they're capable of taking that step up to AFL. If you were to take Petty out, for example, to give him a rest, who would you bring in? The first option was Turner. Well, he's not available this week. Our only other option is Tomlinson, so we've got no other options. Judd
and it would have been Smith if he wasn't injured.
Yeah, but he's
would have been Smith if he wasn't injured.
Yeah, but he's injured. So we have no other options.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah. So we're playing Petty because we have to.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. Yeah, I'm aware of that. What about so time for Magic? Yes or no?
He'll probably come in because Max is out, and it's because he's the only other.
Oh no, I know that. That's why I'm asking. Yeah. Luke Jackson, centre-half forward. Worth trying?
I'd be keen for Magic to come in. I wouldn't have Luke Jackson at centre-half forward. He's going to be carrying the bulk of the ruck over the next 5 weeks, so he won't have any time. Going forward, he's a ruckman first and foremost, and I personally think he'd probably be great for him to work on his forward craft because he's not a natural forward. But if he can build that aspect of the game, it will certainly help us out because you always need good forwards. But I think he's a ruck resting forward, and that's how his career is probably likely to pan out.
Thank you. And one last observation in the future, and I'm not talking about this year, but from next year onwards, how's Jacob van Rooyen? What potential do you think he has?
I reckon he's the player forward I'm most excited about since I first saw Jesse Hogan. I think he's going to be a star, an absolute star. He's got everything you want in a footballer. He's got great hands. He reads the ball well. He uses his body beautiful one-on-one. And most of all, he attacks the ball like a tiger. And his second, third, fourth efforts, I thought he's going to be a star. I would be hesitant to be rushing him into the side anytime soon.
Oh, no one's suggesting we're going to rush him. No, we're not going to rush him. I'm not suggesting that. That's why I said from next year on, let him get a bit of game time in. The worst thing would be to rush him into the side.
I wasn't suggesting that you were suggesting it. So, no, I'm on board the Van Rooyen train.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate the call.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, Andy. Bye, George. Bye, Ben Man.
Bye.
All right.
See you, Michael. Thanks.
Yes, that was Michael. So good to hear from him again. We'll talk more about Jacob Van Rooyen a bit later when I talk about some improvements that I would like to see, and I think maybe it might be time to see what he's got in store. I know we would have liked to have developed him a bit more, but I think we're in a bit of trouble in our forward line, and maybe some young blood is the answer, but we'll talk more about that later. Also, we'll talk more about who replaces Max, because I don't think Majak will actually get a gig. I think there's another forward/ruckman who they might bring back in, Sam Wiedemann. So we'll talk more about that a bit later on. George is not happy
What's
with me.
that saying again by Einstein, Winston Churchill, or the mistakes in history and all of that?
Well, we don't have much choice. Let's move on. Bimman, we want to talk tactics. You had some observation about our overall approach this season, and so you also said that you have some numbers that should calm the MFC SS nerves. And just for our any new listeners or people that have heard that term MFC SS being bandied about, it's just a veil of negativity that envelops many D's fans that we will never see any success, or we're always doomed to fail or whatever. We thought that the premiership would bury that once and for all, but you have 3 losses and it comes back with a vengeance. And many of us are suffering at the moment. So, B-Man, take it away.
I might start with the numbers, actually, just to calm your nerves a little, and anyone else out there struggling with this mid-season slump. One, it is well worth going back just for the exercise to this time last year on Demon Land, just to get a feel of how similar things are. There's been some, I won't prosecute the whole loading argument again. People can have their views on what the cause are, but just in terms of the numbers, it's interesting. There's been some really interesting stuff put on Demon Land about that in the last couple of weeks, but also last year, because the same conversation was exactly the same last year. Engorged Onion put up it last year, and he reposted it this year, a graph that he'd got from a presentation to AFL coaches a couple of years ago. So he made it clear then and again when he posted it recently that it's indicative of a example of a training loads. And so one of the things that it maps is for 22 season at the point in when their intensity increases, and there's two parts to it, or 2 axes, and one of them is volume and intensity. And the volume, the ramping up of training starts at around 8, 9 and goes all the way through to around 15, and the volume intensity goes up slowly and doesn't peak to about round 16, 17, and the volume progressively drops after the bye as well. And why I raise that is because that corresponds exactly with some data that Viper's put up on Viper Crush on podcast thread on Demon Land, the 5 rounds of either side of the bye, which corresponds exactly almost with that period of the premiers in the last 2021. We went 5-1-4 in that period in those 10 games, 5 wins, a draw, and 4 losses. And Richmond followed a very similar path. They lost 3 games coming into the bye that year in their 2019 flag. We worry about 2020 because the shortened game and the interrupted pre-season and all of that stuff knocked all of this out of the side. West Coast, when they won the flag in 2018, they lost 3 on the trot after the the bye. Richmond in 2017 lost 3 games in a row, won a couple before the bye, and then lost again coming into the bye. And even the Bulldogs, they lost coming into the bye last year. So, the pattern is clear in terms of those numbers. So there's some other numbers that are probably good for us to consider as well. The win-loss record of the eventual premiers in 2018-19 and us last year, and how we're travelling this year is all characterised by a strong start to the season, except Richmond in 2019. But Richmond turned it around and had a super strong finish to that season, winning 9 in a row. West Coast went 10-1 after the first 11 rounds. Melbourne, we went 11-1 after 12. And again, this year we know where we are now, 10-3. Every team of those 3 premiers had losses around the matches 11-14. As I said, Richmond's losses were pretty heavy. They lost to North Melbourne in that period, 37 points, 67 points, and 33 points from matches 12-14 in the 3 games. So that's through the bye or through this round 13 that we just had. They got touched up by 33 points by the Roos. I think it was 67 points. No one would have thought they're going to go on and win the flag if some might if they were following this history. Similarly, West Coast lost 3 matches in a row, 15, 28, and 10 points. And we're almost identical this year. We've lost 3 by 38, 12, and 26. And our records at the end of the season were almost identical to 20. We were 17 wins, 4 losses, a draw in last year. Richmond was 16 wins and 16 losses in 2018, and West Coast was 16-6. The best teams in all 3 years on win-loss ratio ended up winning. All struggled during the middle of the season.
I'm not sure, Big Man, if you saw in the podcast thread for this week, it was posted an hour ago by Viper Crunch. He produced a table with the bye and the 5 games preceding it, the 5 games post the bye from 2021 to 2014. He didn't include 2020 because it was a year that was, couldn't plan for. There was lots of, the Festival of Football and lots of 5-day breaks and 4-day breaks. So he didn't include that one. But all the teams going back, all the premiership teams going back to 2014. So that's Melbourne last year, Richmond 2019, West Coast 18, Richmond 17, Bulldogs 16, and Hawthorn 15 and 14. All of them lost games before and after the bye. Around the bye, we were 5-1-4 with the draw. Richmond in 19 was 7-3, West Coast 7-3, Richmond 5-5, Western Bulldogs 6-4, Hawthorn in 15 were 8-2, and Hawthorn in 14 were 7-3. So all of them lost, sort of, with the exception of Hawthorn in 2015, lost at least 3 or some of them more to about 5 games in that 5 before and 5 after the bye. So it backs up your point.
And bottom line is it's sort of a moot point what the cause of that is. But what should be comforting to people is that is the pattern. That's the trajectory of the teams that win the flag. So we're following exactly the same trajectory as we did last year, which of course is no guarantee that we'll win the flag. Injuries will tell us whether we win the flag. Personally, I think that it's only 3-4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, that David King was saying we're so much better than any other team in the competition. It's scary. What's happened? Do you think that some magic has happened in that period of time? That doesn't happen in elite level sport. We're still the best team, which of course, again, is no guarantee that we'll win the flag. That's silly. We could have a bad day on prelim day. Who knows? But I am, it's interesting to hear Goody talk again. He's talking up us being in better spot than we were last year. Now, again, you can talk to the cows come home about what the cause is, but we're following a trajectory of premiership winners. And so I think that's what...
have you paused there, B-Man? George, can you hear B-Man?
Yeah. No, he's paused.
He's paused, so it's on him.
Yeah.
It's not my internet that's crapped out.
No, just to
we're waiting for B-Man.
talk a little bit more about Binman's commentary, and it was tied in with something that I was going to say. I had a look at Richmond in 2019 as well. The 3 games that they lost in the middle of the year around this period were to Adelaide, North, and Geelong. Adelaide finished 11th
He's up
on the
again
ladder.
exactly with the
B-Man, B-Man.
with that chart that I was telling from Engorgine in terms of the mapping of intensity.
I don't know if you can hear us. B-Man, can you hear us?
Just focus on hopefully that we'll follow a similar pattern. Again, it's no guarantee that that we're going to go win the flag. I'm really worried most of all about injuries. So that's my concern.
B-Man, can you hear us? No, I don't think you can hear us. Yeah. He's typing to us in the chat.
Okay, I'll keep talking to. In that case, in that period with Richmond in 2019, they lost to Adelaide, North, and Geelong. Adelaide finished 11th. North finished 12th. Geelong finished top of the ladder, but it gives you an idea about how much they dropped off on. But what was really interesting was around that period, and if you want to hope that history repeats itself, in that sort of May, June, July sort of period, Richmond were missing Cotchin, Nankervis, Asprey, Edwards, Short, Lambert, Rerolt, Rance and Vlosten all around that time, including Nankervis missing for 6 weeks. So that was their main ruck. So the same situation has happened to us. They had terrible injuries as well as these losses around the same period. They didn't lose before, even though they had those injuries. They didn't lose afterwards, even though people like Nankervis still weren't playing. But it's all about what the loadings are about, but also the injuries. The injuries affect you really seriously when your talent disappears, and it's the same situation for us at this very moment. So if there's any hope for us at the moment after only 3 losses, it's Richmond were in exactly the same situation. They walked away with a grand final win in 2019 as well.
Before you go on, B-Man, and glad you can hear us now, but we did lose you.
Bounced off the radio.
We lost you sort of midway. You sort of just paused, so then George sort of took over, and then you came back, and then you couldn't hear us, and you just kept going, which is fine. But you've come out, you're back now. This is a thing. But George, as you were talking, I'm sort of reminded about the disclaimer that you get when you invest in things, or when you see advertisements about investments, and past performance is not an indication of future performance. So it doesn't really.
That's certainly the case, and you can't have those expectations. But like Ben was saying before, and you were saying, you go back now to 2014, and we're following the same profile as what previous winners have done so. But also it's probably, if you really look deeper, I'm sure you'd find similar profiles for whoever finished second in those competitions.
Yeah, absolutely, which I had a look, George, and that's exactly right. The Bulldogs were an outlier because they didn't. But what's interesting with the Bulldogs, when I looked at that from that exact question, George, is that most of the teams did follow that, and but only the runners up. But then the Dogs were successful in that bye period, but they lost their last 3 games of the year. So who knows? Maybe they got it wrong. And look, to be clear, there's no magic bullet. It's not suddenly going to become, there's so many other issues that go into, not least of which is luck to going in to win a flag. It's, all comes down to that one day, which is the last Saturday in September. Heaps has got to go right. But what we're doing now is putting us in the position to have an opportunity to win a flag. If we don't do it now, we won't win the flag. So, I think that's just a thing for people to focus in on. But, it's a little bit like the lack of faith in the Ds and where we're travelling, and how quick some people are to go to mental weakness, or we've been worked out. All those tropes that I've heard ever since Goodwin began, it's like scratching a sore. Suddenly it all comes back up again, where it's like, well, it's just a nonsense. When the method isn't working, as Goody said, well, everything else flows from there. As I said last week, our scoring is completely dependent on our defensive system and our all-spread run. You take that away from us, and we're just a meat and potatoes team that's going to try and win on effort. And there's the other question last week I mentioned about other teams struggling at this time. I don't know if you boys watched the Brisbane Saints game. Did you watch it, George?
I did, yes, yeah.
I have never seen a game of footy at AFL level with 2 teams more obviously fatigued than in that match. It was appalling. Even the commentators were pointing it out. Ex-footballers go, oh, what's going on? They look like they're super tired.
Yeah,
I mean, it was appalling, the skills in that game.
The turnovers were just incredible. It's going from one side to the other. And we'll talk about it later, but the only reason that Brisbane won is because the Saints had so many injuries. I think they had one effective player on the bench by the end of the game.
So the Saints were gassed completely at the beginning of the game, but then they lost 2 players. And at the end, they were just literally, like the last kick of the goal, I forget the fella, the one with the mullet, he could barely kick the ball from 30 metres, and like they were exhausted. It wasn't that the conditions were perfect, apparently. It wasn't humid. It was only 20, it was 20 degrees. There was no humidity. And I can honestly not recall a more obviously fatigued and low standard game. It was incredible. And they're 2 top 4 aspirants. You know, Brisbane are the second favourite for the flag. And similarly, Freo were obviously fatigued in the game against Hawks, and all power to them. I thought it was a super impressive win. Just going back to our win, we could have won this game. We were ahead, in the last quarter. In fact, am I right in saying that we were ahead in the last quarter of all 3 of our losses?
There was only 2 or 3 points in it, wasn't it? A 3/4 time, I think they. We're in game, so I think that of course, it's terrible to lose. We all want the wins, but I think some credit needs to go to the players of how they've dealt with stuff. And again, listen to Goody; he's happy with where we're at.
All right, let's move. Unless, did you have anything else, Big Man? With
really, it was just a question for both of you. And there's some weird tactical anomalies this year that I've noticed. And one of the curious things is, in this last 3 weeks, is that Goody hasn't pulled a single rein to try and stop anything, which I've found really curious. It feels like they're sort of a stress test or something. But they've tried some interesting things, like Brayshaw, who's been brilliant down back and doesn't look like he's coming out of the back line, but could have easily gone back. Jordan's is gone to the wing. Cozzy was started in the centre again this week. But it's interesting. It's almost as if they're saying to the defence, just, you deal with it, or the team deal with it. But really the question I was wondering about, and I don't have an answer, is that our pressure numbers, everyone's been talking about, are down, and we've gone without the ball from number 1 in the AFL last year to mid-table, 11th, 12th, and I think that was before this game, so it's probably dropped even further. And that without the ball pressure is like all the running and defensive running. And I wonder whether it just seems to me that, I'm curious what you guys think the reason for that, if it's conscious or if it's sort of example of something psychological. My feeling is we're playing deeper. We're playing much deeper and allowing the team to come at us, and we're not pushing forward in waves, and it feels more likely that that's by design than it's just happening, because Goody, I think people still underestimate Goody. Nothing happens without it being part of the design.
Not quite sure. Certainly, it's difficult to look at it, particularly over the last 3 weeks, because there have been such big holes in the side, which makes it, it's not surprising the pressure's dropped down over those 3 games previously. But I think you might be right that we're quite happy for the ball to come into the half-back line, because that's where we do the intercepting, and that's where we start our attacks. So they might be almost conceding a bit of ground to them, let them come up and see what they can do, and then counter attack from those areas. But I wouldn't be sure about that.
Yeah, it just seems like we haven't pulled the counter attack lever as much as we did last year, and we needed the wins earlier last year. We needed to get them rolling, and so we're more likely to attack. I reckon. It just seemed, as I knew, and one of the other things that was really interesting about the game against the Pies, and my mate who I was sitting with, both mates I was sitting with, who was driving them spare, is when they were coming at us, we were so slow and deliberate with our ball movement. Now, I wonder whether that was about conserving energy or something else, but it was, like oftentimes we had players free ahead of the ball. Oliver held it up when you could tell he saw the player, because he went to kick it to him and then stopped. And it struck me just the way they were not moving the ball, that was a team direction, that was a coach direction, because, otherwise Oliver just goes in that circumstance without thinking. But, he went to and then stopped himself.
I was just having a read of the podcast thread, and I just thought I'd read, before we go on to our positives and improvements, I thought I'd read out a post from one of our listeners who says, loves the pod, never remember to listen live, might do it tonight. A few points I'd like to raise, and this is from Doug Reamer. The back line. Hibbert's first game back was incredibly underrated, no media attention at all. He may have made one bad clanger, but other than that, it was like he hadn't missed a beat, along with Brayshaw and Gutsy Petty, earning a lot of respect at the moment, playing banged up. We would have lost by 10 goals without those three. However, with May back this week, I would argue that now is the time to move Brayshaw back to the wing. The problem with that is that Jordan has taken the wing role given to him really well. Could Jordan play a half-forward role? Firstly, guys, anyone want to speak of Hibberd? We haven't mentioned him tonight.
Yeah, he was one of my positives as
right.
in the
may as
program.
well go that. You can talk about that.
Look, the addition
and
of
Brayshaw was one.
Yeah,
thing, so.
Hibberd and Brayshaw, as that poster has just said, they saved goal after goal after goal in that game, and it's exactly why Hibberd was in the game. He just used his body strength to outposition and outmaneuver his opponents.
He crushed Elliott, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely crushed him. Elliott only got a run. As a couple of the Pies did. Myercheck got a couple as well when the ball went over the back. Yeah. Because our legs were dead by that stage, and we didn't have anybody left in the back line with Turner and Petty off for so long. But yeah, Hibberd and Brayshaw were fantastic, just holding things together. And again, in Goody's presser, those are the people that he was talking about when he's talking about the effort.
Yeah,
it was so critical to us. I wouldn't think we'd need to move. I wouldn't think we'd want to move Brayshaw away from where he's doing so well. Jordan's establishing himself nicely on that wing. It's created another option for us down back with Brayshaw. We're going to have problems. Turner's obviously out for a long time now, so he's not an option for us.
3 to 4, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Tomlinson may well come back in. Maybe I don't know. May will certainly come back in. But even with May there and Lever there and Salem there, Brayshaw's still going to keep playing in those roles. Wouldn't move him.
4 to 5 weeks ago, Salem comes back, normal service resumes, Brayshaw goes back to the wing, but I could not have been more impressed with Brayshaw in the last few weeks. And I've always, barracking for Melbourne all my life, one of the things I've valued the most and the players I respect the most, and that's why I always loved Robbie Flower, was the players who play their best games in losing games. Because to me, it says something about their approach to the game and their, without make it too sort of high and mighty, but like their approach to life, really. And I loved Gus's game on the weekend. His courage to go back with the flight, he's smart, he's just made that position his own. It's like he plays it different to Salem. He's almost plays it sort of a tall medium. He goes back. He's the one taking the intercept marks. So I can't see them changing that. What that means for someone like Rivers is a really interesting question. JJ, I think, could play anywhere. I think we talked about it a few weeks. You put him anywhere. He's just such a smart footballer, but I like him on the wing because it's the spot where he can use his smarts the most. And he's also, I think he's got the sort of mentality to play the offside wing role and not be too fussed by it. So, where that leaves a player like Rivers is a really interesting question. We don't have to worry about it at the moment. But yeah, I'd be keeping him. What was the other question, Andy?
He just asked about, with a Brayshaw back to the wing, Jordan to a half-forward flank.
Yeah, but I agree on Hibberd. Hibberd was fantastic, and I was really thrilled how fit and strong he looked. He looked back to his fitness from last year, and it's interesting, what he brings to that table in terms of his ability. So, again, we had some players who really stood up, and as you say, George, Goody was quick to emphasise the effort, wasn't he?
Yeah. George, that's your positive. My positive, it's not really one for discussion, but the only one I could find from this match was simply the fact that the bye has come and not a moment too soon. We do look absolutely spent. We're banged up injury-wise. Petty will love the rest. when I wrote these notes, I didn't know Max was going to be out. So I didn't even know he was in a moon boot. So I sort of thought he'd like the rest. But hopefully the week gives us some respite, and hopefully, B-Man, you're correct. It's just a loading issue. But
The pity is, Andy, that it's only a 9 or 10 day break. It's not. We seem to have been dudded again in this respect. When of all the situations, we actually need a long break this time, sort of thing, given the injuries that are prevalent.
Absolutely did. If we, for once, we could do with that Sunday 4 o'clock game. B-Man, you're positive. We're right where we need to be. Is there anything you want to expand on that? I thought you might have already talked about that enough with our loading and all the other issues. So
we were 11-2 last year. We're 10-3 this year with about the same percentage. Doing fine.
Yep. All right. Improve. This might. I might read more of Doug Reamers. He's talked about the forward line. Then I'll go into my improvements, because that talks about the forward line, so we can discuss all of it at once. We need this is Doug saying, we need a pack crunching key forward. I've lost faith in the weed last year, but what other options do we have? Does Van Ruin, even though he's young, come in and get the license to lead and fly at the packs? The way he plays reminds me of a young Hogan, not as clinical, but just as brave. He goes into more about our and I'll get to them in a sec, but I'll go into my improvement. For me, it's clear that our second tall forward options are not working. Perhaps the issue might simply be that it's the method that's not working, and instead of bombing it in, we just need to lower our eyes and hit up a leading target. Having said that, I'm not confident in either Wiedemann or Brown, that's Mitch Brown, as T-Mac's replacement. So where does that leave us? When we had T-Mac in the side and scoring wasn't an issue, I was content with being able to have the flexibility. Excuse me, guys. Sorry, not COVID. The flexibility to develop rookie Jacob Van Ruin in the twos, and often rushing a key position player into the seniors can impact their development. However, is it time that we think outside the box in regards to our forward line and perhaps pull the trigger and see what he can do? From the glimpses that I've seen him play at Casey, he provides more strength and presence than either the two aforementioned players. It might be a risk, but could be a calculated risk, given we have tried two alternatives that have failed to meet even the most basic of expectations. Before I have a coughing fit and have to mute my mic, do either of you want to go in? Can we pull the trigger on Jacob Van Ruin? I know we didn't want to have to do it. It might be too early, but we're in dire straits, guys. Who wants to take that?
Personally, I wouldn't. I could see him coming in round 19 and out round 20, 21 or something, but I would now. I don't know about what you think, George, but he's not ready. I don't think AFL, and why? It's not an emergency break glass moment. That's why it might feel like if your MFCS is flaring again and you're reading too much Demon Land and you're listening to David King and woe is me as a Demon fan, it's all coming back to me now. It's not an emergency we're in. It's not. So I wouldn't be bringing a young player in for. It sends a funny message, to be honest. If you don't think he's ready, last week, why is he suddenly ready this week? But I reckon he's a sneaky chance to be brought in late in the season, because then his freshness and if he plays now, comes in now, and there was any thought of him playing in the finals, 6-7 weeks of senior footy might completely flatten him come final. So if there is any thought of bringing him in at any point in the season, I would think it would be later in the season, give him a couple of games before the season, before the home and away finishes. So if he is going to play, he's playing at peak freshness coming into the finals.
It's going to be difficult for the selection committee this week, so I'll present the counter argument in that nothing that Mitch Brown has done in the last two games would warrant keeping him in the side. Wiedemann's only been down at Casey for 1 week, and he performed adequately in half a game and did very little in the first half of the game that he played in, and certainly Van Ruin did more perhaps than what Wiedemann did, and you finish up in this dilemma of, gee, we really don't want to bring him in, but in this case, what are the options? It's the same options. When people are talking about who we put in the back line, Turner probably wouldn't have got a game.
100% wouldn't have got a game.
Wouldn't have got a game previously, but you just get to that situation where you've got no other options. And the problem,
we did. We had Tomlinson. Having said that,
sorry, yeah. But having so it gets really, really difficult. You don't want to play them, but necessarily for their own development, but maybe that's the best option that we've got at this point in time. Hopefully, T-Mac will come back, with a few rounds to go in the season. But we'll get the opportunity to. I suspect we will see JVR at some point during this season. I think he's too much. There's too much talent and sheer talent there that needs to be exposed at some point in the season to the AFL.
Goody's got form in bringing in. I mean, Bowie's the obvious one, but other players that come in, and even Wiedemann. I can't remember how many games he played in 2018. Andy, you probably know, but and that's a thing in footy, hasn't it? I think about Dermot Brereton.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a long time ago, I know, but Van Ruin reminds me a little bit, not quite as not quite the same, but they're probably similar build. And if you are going to bring someone like an X factor, Goody is, he seems a bit dour as a coach, but he's not. He tries some tactical things in it, and he's not sort of adverse to throwing someone in. I think that. It would be early in the season to breaking glass. We got Tomlinson there. I would think Tomlinson, give him a crack up forward. He played a season at the Giants up forward. I hate the idea of Petty going up forward. He's, particularly now, of all time. So I don't think I'd be throwing him up forward.
No.
Wiedemann played 3 games in 2016, the last couple of games of the season. He played 7 in 2017 and 10 in 2018.
Well, maybe I'm thinking Spargo, but Spargo played most of 2018 as well.
Yeah,
didn't he?
He did. I think you are thinking of Spargo.
Yeah, we had that conversation, I think. But, he's going to be a star. I totally agree. He's
18 games.
Super talent, but I wouldn't be in any hurry to bring him in now. In that same thread podcast on the thing, there was a Red Sox a comment about Benny Brown's inability to mark at one grab. It's like,
well, he is having that problem at the moment. It seems that he's getting his hands to it and then not being able to take it in that one grab. So,
yeah,
is a bit of a problem. What about our Doug Reamer has talked about, he's sort of asking about our small forwards, but he's saying that Bedford should come in rather than talk ins and outs yet. What do you think of our small forwards, Spargo, Alex Neil-Bullen? Are we getting enough of them offensively and in turn their pressure and defensive stuff?
At the very real risk of repeating myself, it's just so... If you ascribe to the theory that I subscribe to, that we're in a heavy loading phase that'll go to a period, then you can't really make an assessment of where they're at, because a player like Nibbler and Spargo, their whole game is based around the amount of kilometres they run. Nibbler is upset often enough, who had an average game, it must be said. Yeah. I was thinking of you, George. That was definitely a good case for Nibbler to be dropped this week, but of course he won't be. But his game is built on his up and down the ground running. If you take that away from Nibbler, what does that leave you? An average half-forward flanker who seems to have got the complete goal kicking yips. I had no confidence he'd kick that. But even that, you could argue, was fatigue-related. He'd barely made the distance from 40 metres, nor could Harm for that matter. Harms didn't make the distance from running straight at goal, straight towards me.
I think he was passing it, which he should have had
passing that. No way.
Should have had a shot.
There's no way he was passing that ball. So I think it's just a bit hard to judge where those small forwards are at. I actually thought Cozzy was terrific. His energy was terrific and really stood out.
Okay. George, you wanted to talk about outside mids as your improvement.
Yeah, that's exactly what Binman was just talking about then. That the disposals from the outside mids in Nibbler and Harms in particular were just below par. Nibbler with 54% disposal efficiency. He's not like a Viney who's in, trying to hand pass through people's legs and heads and things. And you don't expect high efficiency. He's an outside, and he's in this game. His disposal just killed us. Harms wasn't much better, but again, it's if it's about the loadings, it's not surprising when you've got players who are meat and veggie sort of players, and every team needs meat and veggie sort of players. If they're fatigued and tired, they really drop. The level of skill really drops off dramatically. So hopefully we can see an improvement in those areas from those outsiders.
Yeah, it was so frustrating, wasn't it? But almost more frustrating was our fumbles.
Yeah,
track cost us a certain goal that would have put us even further up at this time. So
track fumbled that ball twice. I didn't think it's possible. It was, our kicking was appalling on the weekend, but the fumbles and the first touch. It's really interesting is that when they don't fumble, you never think, oh wow, he's taken that cleanly, or unless it's really evident. But as soon as the team starts fumbling, you really notice it, don't you? Not so much the fumble, but the impact of it, like the way that a chain of possessions and transition breaks down at that point. And a lot of them, because we're not pushing up hard, we're not getting those turnovers that we were when we're up and about. And so when we turn it over, it's in their zone. And the Pies, I thought, were fantastic in their ability to relentlessly take advantage of that. Just clearly, the other horror of that game was Cox. And I said to my mate that my idea of hell is going to a big game, say a final at the MCG against Collingwood, and Cox getting off the chain and the crowd start chanting USA, USA. And thankfully it didn't happen, but I was walking down the back steps of the Ponsford stand. There's a bunch of really drunk young Pies fans all chanting Melbourne are shit, Melbourne are shit, followed up by, you guessed it, USA.
They were doing USA during the game, but I thought early on, before he sort of got off the chain, I thought they cheer every time he goes near the ball, almost like they're surprised that he did something good, and then he ended up having a pretty decent game.
I reckon if you're going to mount a case against fatigue, you'd show one clip. Him running inside 50 with no one tackling him and kicking a goal from 45 metres. We might have done the other teams a favour. Maybe they'll be forced to keep him in for the next 3-4 weeks because
he played his one good game for the year.
Yeah.
Big man, too many. Oh, I think this is directed at me. Too many fans need to harden up and show some faith. Why do I feel that? And then that's my writing. Why do I feel that this is directed at me?
Well, if the shoe fits, it wasn't directed at you, but it's quite Freudian that you've taken it on. But yeah, I just think to what's the saying is, take a big glass of concrete, harden up, and write it out. And again, I said it last week. I said that this game was a danger game. That I don't back against Melbourne, but if I was gonna, it would have been this game. And we're in for another month. If last year's anything to go by, we're in for another 6 weeks of suboptimal performance. So buckle up and stay the course.
I know someone who put we were paying, I think, $4 or $4 last week against the Swans, $4.20 or something.
They were paying, not us.
Sorry, they were paying $4.20, and he put $500. He's a Melbourne supporter. Put $500 on the Swans, so he did. Yeah. He did all right out of that.
Well, I can't do it.
No, I can't do that either. Hedge your bets.
But I will back the D's for the flag when we get to fours. When it touches fours, bang, I'm on. 360 just for those who are playing at home.
All right, let's move on to, before we go to ins and outs, let's talk about the Casey game. Casey continued on their unbeaten run in a wet and wild game out at Casey on Sunday. Watched a little bit after half time, and we had we had such a huge lead at half time, and then I didn't see many goals after that. It was pretty wet. Casey defeated the Magpies by 52 points, setting up a win by half time. Can't remember who was going to talk about this first. Is that you, George?
Maybe both of us.
Yeah, you can both talk about it, but who wants to talk first?
Look, this was an interesting game as a game of footy to watch. Casey were just, particularly in that first half, where by half time they're leading by, 52 points, which was the final margin. Yeah. Then it absolutely bucketed down in typical Casey fashion. But previous to that, there was typical Casey wind. But what I thought was really interesting, I switched across to look at the GWS North game going on at the same time and promptly switched back because the Casey game was far superior to watch. It was just awful what was going on in the other channels. Around the players, it was interesting. Rivers stood out as, he's far better than VFL. He had 23 disposals, including 8 marks. It was just fantastic. Dunstan, 39 disposals. He just got everything that came his way and more so. His disposal at this level wasn't all that bad, which compares to the pressure. It's a good comparison with the pressure at AFL level. It just drops off a bit. Andy Moniz, Wakefield, very lively, very into a lot of things.
Yeah, I like him.
Yeah, but died off a little bit in the second half. But the same could be said for Bedford as well. Hunt did pretty well. Again, a player who's better than VFL level, and his capability and run at the time were good to see. Laurie was interesting, 23 disposals, but 0 marks. So he's getting the ball a lot on the inside. Another one who dropped away was Deacon Smith. Again, played well in the first half, but really dropped away. Well, Woden looks like someone who's going to really turn out nicely for us. I think bit of development there, but he's developed the body and he's got the same smarts as his old man. Look forward to it probably next year for him coming through. One who I like who's not on our list is Corey Ellison. He will be on an AFL list next year of some sort. He's not going to be missed again. He can play forward and play back. He's just a great footballer. So it's nice to see him playing. In this game, we didn't have Dorr. I don't know why.
He's missed a number of games this year. I think he had COVID strange. And he's had flu and various reasons. And
so when we're talking about ins and outs later on, that might be one of the questions: is he actually available in a couple of weeks' time? Van Rooyen we've talked about. He was just superb. He's playing a lot up the ground.
And down back.
He went down back later.
Quarter. Yeah. And it was also playing in the ruck as well as a backup ruck. They're obviously trying to develop all those roles with him. But he's something special. It's easy to forget he's 19 and has played 9 VFL games, and we're already talking about him in the way we are. But Casey, it was a really interesting game. We performed adequately, I suppose. Didn't see much of him in the first half, but then he turned it on a bit in the second half, but really didn't, even though the conditions weren't great. I think he got 1 goal in the end, so it wasn't something spectacular, and it was only the first week that he's been sent back there, so usual story. If you really want to get back into the side, you need to be showing a bit more than that.
I thought his attack on the ball was really good in the second half. It was pretty average in the first half, but I reckon him. I don't know. Obviously, maybe he got a rocket at half time, but I thought I didn't actually see the last quarter. I saw a bit of it, but I saw the third quarter, and I thought his attack on the ball was much, much better. Yeah, didn't clunk any, but that's really all I want to see is just him to smash. Yeah,
it was chalk and cheese between the two halves, but the eternal question with Weed is why do they need to be like that? You've got to do it for the whole game.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that's it's interesting your point about Van Rooyen going back and in the ruck, and makes me wonder whether part of that is to, maybe I'm trying to feed into your confirmation bias here, Andy, but maybe that's about seeing how he goes against getting whacked a bit. Because if he goes into the forward line in an AFL team, he's going to get smashed a bit.
They would not play him in the ruck if that wasn't sanctioned by the senior coaching staff wanting him to get some minutes here and there, because they could have played Weed in the ruck, which I'm sure he probably did at times. considering Magic was out and they had another. Who's the ruckman? Bell?
Bell, yeah.
Yeah,
So-
and Collingwood had a pretty good side in. I think it was certainly stronger than some of the other VFL teams would play.
So he that ruck work, him going into the ruck would have been. There's no way they'd put him in the ruck if that wasn't.
No, and he's
sanctioned.
and he's not a great ruck. As
Yeah, but he's got a
natural.
Yeah, but they put him in there.
Yes.
You go.
That's what I meant.
Which was
He wouldn't have
interesting.
gone in there unless it was sort of put him in every now and again.
Yeah.
Yeah, good summary, George, and I concur with all of that. Moniz Wakefield has got something about him, just the way he plays, and he makes good decisions. And Rosman's out with a hammy, isn't he? So it's a pity, bad timing for him because he's the sort of tall player half that he's probably one of our top 12 terms of height. Like he'd be close to 6'2" or something, I guess, in the old. But I agree on Woden. And to be honest, I wasn't super impressed with him the first couple of times I saw him play, but he's really improved. And it's a good point you make about he looks physically more AFL ready, but he also looks a bit more comfortable when he's holding the ball a bit longer and making good decisions. And he's got a really nice, neat kicking action, which is so important. And I also concur about Dunstan as that he was fantastic, wasn't he?
Yeah, he had leather poisoning of the first degree.
And Laurie, did you mention he played an all right game? I thought.
Yeah, 23 disposals. Yeah. My concern is what I've raised with before. How does Laurie get a game in the seniors between who he's behind? It's difficult, especially when you've got Bedford and Chandler and those sort of players sort of sitting ahead of him at the moment. Where does he go from here? I just don't know.
Bides his time, or I guess injuries happen, as we know. So
yeah.
Well, let's move in to the ins and outs. Before we go into the ins and outs proper for this week, I think we need to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is how do we cover the loss of Max Gawn for the next 3 to 5 weeks? Luke Jackson can't be expected to ruck all day, and with T-Max sidelined for longer, the Max is out for I guess that probably will give Sam Wiedemann another chance, and we know Sam has been training, been playing in the ruck. They sort of trained him up to do that, to be that relief ruckman for Max. So, are we going to see Sam? He might have got his chance anyway with Mitch Brown not really putting his hand up to stay in the side. And I guess then we sort of discussed this, that the other option is Magic Door. But he too has been in and out of the twos with COVID, perhaps the flu, and he was out again this week. So how do you guys seeing us covering this massive loss of our premiership captain and 5-time All-Australian over the next few weeks? What do you think will happen? Who's going to come in? Will it be Magic? Will it be Sam?
I think that's the ultimate question. Will it, again, the selection table problems. Magic's certainly tall. He can do the ruck, but he doesn't do much around the ground, which is going to be so critical at AFL level. The other possibility is Tomlinson's actually done some rucking in the past as well. At times, so maybe it's an option for us with Turner out. Maybe bring Tomlinson in as a backman come ruck. I don't know. I'm not confident about it by any stretch. But it's sort of equal confidence with Dorr as well. You bring in Dorr as a forward ruck.
No one that comes in is going to be able to do what Max does around the ground in the marks up down the line or down last line of defence.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that's why it comes to the selection committee. They see the players better than we do.
I'd love Magic Door to get a run. It's a bit curious. Is that 2 of the last 4 games, last 3 games he's not played? No injury.
He played in the Swans game at the MCG, but previous game before that he was out.
And this game's out to 2 of the last 3. Yeah, so that's not great preparation. And I mean, it's awful timing if he's got a niggle or something in terms of the opportunities arrived. The question I have is a bit my question over him is, can he be the number 1 ruck? Is he fit enough to be the number 1 ruck? And I suspect I'm not entirely sure that he is, and I mean it's a bit hard to tell. Obviously, he looks fit enough, but so I'd love to see him come in, but I suspect more likely is Weed to come in and play forward with, we've got a ruckman. We've got Jackson. He's a ruckman. He's not a forward. He's a ruckman. So he goes into the Gawn role. He's been playing 50-50 almost for the last 4 or 5 weeks, hasn't he? Percent, in terms of ruck time, maybe 60-40. He just goes to 70% rucking, and then Weed gives him a chop out. That seems to me the logical. I think Weed, I like him, his ruck craft. He worked on it pretty hard back in 2019, and I think it's not too bad. And so, we've got a player we drafted as a ruckman. He's been rucking all season. He hasn't been in super form, but there's ridiculous comments in a thread about his contract of people being okay with, trading him off, and it's actually, we won't lose too much if we get a couple of first rounders. I mean, please, come on. This guy is a future, like he's already a star. He's only a kid. He's 21 at his next birthday. He's a phenomenon. And, so maybe it's his time to carry that number one ruck mantle for the next 4 weeks. We're in an amazing position that we've got him. So let's use him. I don't think Magic's a good enough forward to then be a forward ruck. So that leaves Weed. And Weed gets one more shot at it. And just in terms of those forwards, I could not agree more about your comment about Mitch Brown. He's been, it's interesting, isn't it? It says something about the standard of VFL, because he looks a cut above VFL, and he's looked several levels below AFL in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I liked him when he came in 2020. I rated him as a backup.
Yeah. His first game was okay, his first game back in, but he's just not built for AFL footy, is he? He's not strong enough.
No. The other option that we've got with the ruck is that Brisbane only named McInerney as a single ruck last week. He's very physical, and that's one aspect that Dorr can handle, because he is very strong. Around the ground becomes a problem, because I would hate to see Jackson pummeled by someone like McInerney. That's a point.
That's a point.
Because have they got two ruckmen? They've got McInerney and his Fort.
And they had Fort, but they named Fort on the interchange. It was interchange, which was very fortuitous for them in this game, because then they had two rucks on the ground to counter St Kilda's Ryder and Marshall. Yeah.
Would you prefer he pummels Weed?
I think he'll pummel whoever he's up against, but Magjack's got the body at least to be able to stand up against that, But I'd hate to see Jackson pummeled, and then expected to do it again and again in the next couple of weeks.
So
Tomlinson's an interesting one. Sorry, Andy, because it would have been a pretty serious bit of man management to go on for Turner to get selected ahead of him. Now Turner's, and it was that effort. I just watched him attack that ball, and it was a bit stupid, to be honest, the way he attacked. He attacked it head on, basically, but it was like first game in, just desperate. I thought he played great. That, getting back to Michael's question about Turner, I thought he did some disco. It's great to be yelling disco, but I thought he did some really nice things, and it was such a pity that he, and I watched it. I had my binoculars on that contest, and he was out. I can't remember if his head. I think his head ricocheted on the ground as well, but that's not where he did his fractured cheekbones. So he was gone when he hit the ground. He stood up and he was wobble. Fortunately, he was right near the bench, but that's a real shame. But where does that leave Tomo if you're not getting, you're getting Turner? So it'd be interesting to see. I think Tomo could work up forward as a short-term gap, but as you say, he could probably spend some time rucking and strong. He's big enough. So
the next few weeks we've got Brisbane, we've got Adelaide in Adelaide, Geelong in Geelong, and then up to Darwin for Port Adelaide.
Alice.
Yeah. I won't say same.
Don't book your tickets to Darwin.
But yes,
does 5 weeks or 4 games? Is it 5 weeks out, including the bye, or is it 5 games?
Depends if it's 5 weeks out. It could be 3.
Yeah.
Some players have only missed 3 weeks with that. So
it's 3 to 5. At least it's not 4 to 6, because you know what that can lead to.
Yes.
So, if Goody, channeling my inner Goody, that it's an opportunity for the team to really show some resilience and the fans to show some resilience and to see what, soldier out, soldier in. Good football cliche there.
Well, it's hard to replace a 5-time All-Australian.
Yeah. I mean, and now, like, we've seen May out, like the impact of having May out for 3 games. How many games was Lieber out for? He was out for 3. Salem, it was out for 6 or 7.
No,
as I said at the top, now we're looking at 30 to 40 of our best 22 out already at this point of the season. So, hopefully that will turn around. And I mean, before people jump on Selwyn, Griffith, all of them are impact injuries. So very few soft tissue. I think there was a calf that maybe Hibbo had, but the rest are all football accidents, really. And that happens. We were lucky enough for them not to happen last year. It's a big factor in our premiership, and we've had our bad luck, and we'll get a better run for the rest of the season.
8 or 9 days until our next game. Anyone else likely to come in and come out? Obviously, Stephen May's a lock to come in. He'll replace Disco Turner. I
think Bedford will come in. I suspect Bedford went back to play a full game at Casey.
Absolutely.
Would be my feeling.
Absolutely. So Chandler will go back for Bedford. Any other changes? You want to pull the trigger on anyone?
I can't see them doing anything radical. I mean, there's no one else to bring in. So, our much vaunted depth is being tested. The one thing I'll say, the other thing, just while I think about the VFL game, is the coverage was great, I thought. And Libby Birch was one of the commentators. Yeah. She was great. She was terrific. Really good. Gave some really interesting insights, I thought.
Yeah. I loved the comment that she said, the umpiring's been fantastic today, and the other commentator said, that's because it's your brother.
Yeah. She also mentioned it was interesting, the impact of the wind down at Casey, and the conditions down there, and that must be a hell of a place to play footy, I'd reckon. But I thought she was terrific.
I think she's got a good future in that commentating thing. I think the next step for her will probably be to do sort of those boundary line things for the AFL matches. So good on her. I reckon.
She can replace BT anytime.
Let's go into opposition watch. George, the Brisbane Lions took on the Saints on Saturday night. They ended up cruising to victory against an undermanned and injury-riddled St Kilda, who had no one, as we mentioned, no one sort of left on the bench. And top it all off, the Lions have dethroned us from top spot on the ladder, which we've enjoyed for pretty much the whole season. This sets up a top-of-the-table clash next, after the bye, given that they and Freo also have the bye, so no one will go ahead of us this week.
As Ben mentioned before, it actually wasn't a great game to watch. It was a war of attrition out there, and quite frankly, the only reason Brisbane won the game was because the Saints had so many players injured during the game. I think there were 2 concussion injuries.
2 concussions, both bad ones. So.
Really bad. They finished up with only 2 players on the interchange bench, and I think one of them was Mason Wood, who had an ankle injury, so he could barely run. They just had no legs, and the difference at three-quarter time was 2 or 3 points, I think. It's a very similar sort of situation to what we were in. One side had to win, and in this case it was because Brisbane had less injuries and had more players on the ground to rotate. So it was hard to gain any insights into them. Interestingly, they've averaged 15 goals a game this season, so they're all about high scoring during the games, and they've got lots of options to achieve that. So it'll be good for us to have a decent backline available, and hopefully have all our main players available. So if we can hold them to the mid-season drop-off that we've had to the 60-point margin, we will win the game, even though our forward line hasn't been all that functional. Interestingly, they've lost, and again, talking about injuries, they've only got 3 people who are injured at the moment. One of them who hasn't played, I think. The other ones occurred in this game. Dane Zorko did a hamstring, so he'll be out for a couple of weeks. And Gardner, who has rib injury, so he might be out for a couple of weeks as well, as he's one of their backmen. But it's going to be very interesting if they're in loading phase as well, which you would suspect because they're obviously challenging this year. If they're not in loading phase, they're in serious trouble because it was a pretty ordinary performance. The number of turnovers was extraordinary to watch as players simply couldn't hit their opposition targets for both sides.
Yeah, it was some sort of match. Definitely in loading phase. I mean, they're super fatigued. I mean, they've gone the last 5 matches are win, loss, win, loss, win. And one of their wins was pretty uninspiring against the Giants where they, as I said last week, I think they were down 5 goals within a blip. Yeah, I mean, I agree. My query on them, I'd rank the Saints ahead of them because they've got a better defence. I just don't think that the Lions have got a premiership winning defence. They've got a good team. I think I'd have them, on pound for pound, I'd have them the second best list in the AFL behind us. Not far, probably arguably not far behind us either. I just don't think that their defensive system stacks up in 2021. So 2022, I should say. I'm a year behind myself. Yeah. So it's interesting that that they didn't retool it and change it like the way Geelong have clearly done in terms of the way they play. That's less about their defensive system, more about the way they get territory, I guess, with the Cats. But they certainly get opened. For a top 4 team, they get opened up a lot, even when they're at their best.
And that's with really talented defenders like Harris Andrews and Adams and Gardner as well. They should be doing better than what they actually are. But they're an interesting phenomena.
And there's a couple of players, big outs that could possibly Zorko, who I just every time I watch him, I hate him as a footballer more and more. He was a shocker in that game against the Saints, and but I think he's got a hammy, and there's someone else's. So hope they rush him back.
Well, they said it wasn't a big tear or big hammy.
Paging Weber for a tear, but so like you can't imagine he'll get up if it's a tear at all. So
and it's only a 9 or 10 day break for them as well.
Yeah.
All right.
I here's my tip for the game is that if, again, looking back at history last year, Essendon was the next game that we played, but that Port was the game that we got up for. And Max basically said afterwards that we freshened for this game. That was a 6-day or 7-day break. I wonder whether that I'm hoping that we'll set ourselves for that game, and maybe they'll give them a lighter load in the lead up to them, and give some maybe get some freshness with a view to winning that game.
Well, I wonder whether the boys are off. They obviously get a break in the bye.
4 days, I think. It's not a huge amount of time, is it?
Yeah, I saw. I think it was Harms's Instagram. He looked like he was up at some tropical location. They'd have a few days off. All right, I think we might leave it there, and the D's might have the bye this coming weekend, but we will be back next week to do our annual mid-season review. I'm not sure what that will look like just yet, but the boys and I still have to discuss the format, so look out for that show next week wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you to George, thank you, Big Man, thank you to Michael, who called in earlier in the show, and thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week, and we'll discuss we'll give our thoughts on the season to date. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.